Hello everyone. Welcome back to the second part of the lecture Formalist Stylistic Analysis. In this part of the lecture, we will be doing formalistic stylistic analysis of a poem. If your idea is not clear about what formalist stylistics is, so please watch part first of this lecture. In part first, we discuss these all key idea in formalist stylistics. So we will begin where we left. If you're doing formalist stylistic analysis of a poem, so there is a checklist of formalist category. You should ask yourself, okay, that are there instances of deviation in the text? Is the deviation from the norms of the language? Is the deviation from the norms of a genre? Is the deviation from norms external to the text? Is it external deviation? Is the deviation from norms internal to the text? Is it internal deviation? At what linguistic level does deviation occur? Phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, graphology, or discourse? So these are certain questions you should put in front of yourself while you're doing stylistic analysis, right? To ask about deviation, whether that is internal or external, that is related to genre or register, right? Or at what level deviation occur. Okay, there are certain level, for example, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantic, graphology, discourse. There are some more questions also. For example, that relate the deviation to the normal pattern of language or the genre. If you find some deviation in a text in a poem, then you have to relate it with a normal pattern of language. Then how is it different? Do the deviation create text internal meaning or not? Are there instances of parallelism in the poem? Is there repetition of words, phrases, or lines or stanza in the poem? And do the parallel structure or repeated parts in the text create text internal meaning or not? And how do the deviant, parallel, and repeated structure contribute to coherent interpretation of the poem? So these all are the questions or a checklist you should have in front of you while you're doing formalist stylistic analysis of a poem. So the poem we are discussing, that is to analyze, is Half an Hour After. This is the title of the poem, Half an Hour After, by the Australian poet Mark O'Connor, whose poetry shown a particular interest in the environment. So his poetry, he's focusing on the environment. The poem depicts a conversation between two academics half an hour after a terrible disaster has caused considerable damage and claimed many lives. It appears in O'Connor collection of poems, Reef Poems, published in 1976. Let's see the poem. Now, here we have a poem. When you come to think of it, said Dr. Happel. Much too late, of course, said Professor Sprung. So, two scientists are there. One is Professor and one is Doctor. Dr. Hippo and Professor Sprung. So, when you come to think of it, you see that we don't know that what are they talking about. So, it is anaphoric reference, something that is already mentioned, but we do not know about it. Okay, flicking off his trouser cuff. What's just happened was all but inevitable. We never stood more than 40% chance, I thought, of decking the thing in our lifetimes. It's sad, really, said Professor Sprung, watching the goldfish die and in their broken bowls. The species one thought had such potentials. Well, it's no use crying over spelled uranium. And okay, less Dr. Hippo regarding the ruins of the scenario common room. Okay, room though to think of those bodies out there and no one around to bury them ever. Not our job, thank God, said Spunks, but if we last out the hour, we will be able to finish the spot. No more Anglo Saxon declarations ever. And the funny thing is, I still don't really feel anything. So the first deviation we can see that is at syntax level, that when you come to think of it, it is a question but it has been mentioned, okay, in the form of a statement, which shows a non-serious attitude of the person or this Dr. Heppo, who's a scientist. We can see that here also it is used, which is referred to anaphoric reference, that's something that has already been mentioned, okay, or the conversation we know that is from the middle. Now, much to a last of courage, said Professor Spongs, flicking off his trouser cuff. What has happened was all but inevitable. So they are, you see, not sensible scientists. Okay, they do not take responsibility that there was a destructive damages to the human life and the species, right? Human being, plants, animal, but they do not care about it. They say what was supposed to happen and it happened. Here in line 10 you can see that spelt uranium. So spelt is referred to a liquid. Uranium, that is something that is solid. So we can't say, we can say that spelt water, spelt tea, spelt coffee, but we can't say spelt uranium. So this is semantic deviation, right? So here we know from the middle of the poem that they are talking about the nuclear destruction after World War II would happen, right? So just after half an hour they're discussing such disastrous incident. So here we will have some explanation of this semantic deviation, unusual phrases choice. Now the key deviation in the poem occurs at the semantic levels in the phrase spelt uranium. While most of the language in the poem is straightforward, this phrase stands out because spelt is usually used with liquid and uranium is a solid metal. So this unusual combination is significant for two reasons. It revealed that the poem is about a nuclear disaster, something that had only been hinted at before. It showed the scientists' indifferent attitude toward the disaster. The phrase no use crying over spilled uranium echoes the proverb no use crying over spilled milk, suggesting that the view that the disaster is unavoidable. And beyond fixing, this highlights the irresponsibility of the scientists in the face of much massive destruction as they refuse to take responsibility for their mistake. So in this line number 10, we can see spell uranium. It shows they do not take responsibility for this disasters. What was supposed to happen and it happened. And they mocking this proverb that crying or spell uh, uh, milk. They say that no crying over spell uranium. Semantic deviation, unusual phrase choice. Phrase spelt uranium as an unusual choice in the poem. Why stand out? Normally spelled refer to liquid while uranium is a solid metal. So this unexpected combination catches the reader's attention. There's something important about this point. So you're going to pause for a while. You stop for a while. You think, okay, that why? Spelled uranium. Why not spelt water, spelt milk? right? Something liquid. So there's an important idea there. The writer, the poet wants you to pause for a while, to stop for a while, and to think about this. Significance of spelled uranium hint at a nuclear disaster. We know there's something they're talking about, that is nuclear disaster. This phrase revealed that the poem is about a nuclear disaster, something only suggested before. Scientists' attitude. The phrase mirror the saying, no use crying over the spilled milk. This suggests that the scientists see the disaster as unavoidable and beyond fixing. Syntactic deviation in the poem, we can also see question structures. In the first line structure, the poem begins with question but uses the structure of a statement and ends with a comma, not a question mark, right? So we can see here, okay, that here the it was supposed to put here a question mark, but here we have a comma, right? And it is in the form of statement, rather it is in the form of a question. Now effect, the deviation create a casual, informal tone for a discussion about something as serious as human extinctions. So there was something important about human extinctions, right? An important matter was being discussed, but the tone was very much formal, but because when you're using a question in the form of a statement. Full stop in line 12. Structure. In line 12, we can see that a full stop is placed before the sentence is completed. Okay, so though the thought continuing in the next line. So what will be the effect of this? The pause in the end of the line 12, let me make it zoom, emphasize the scales in the disaster. Now the start of line 13 emphasizes the scientist's emotional detachment from the consequences to their action. Line 12 and 13, you can see where full stop was required, but they did not use. Where it is not required, they used. You can see here line 13, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Out there, and there no one around to bury them ever, right? So you can see here. Now discoursal deviation. There is also discoursal deviation in the poem. So opening conversation in line 1, where we can see that it anaphoric, where anaphoric references is used here. You can see, right, where it is. Yes, here it. So this is discoursal deviation, where the poem begins from the middle. Okay, introduction. The poem begins in the middle of conversation between two scientists discussing a nuclear disaster. Using of it, the pronouns it in line 1 might refer to something already mentioned which the reader hasn't seen, or the disaster they are discussing. Effect. This creates a sense of mastery, encouraging the reader to keep reading to figure out what it refers to. So the readers might think that what does the word it refer to? So that's why they have to read the coming and further lines of the poem to get to the point. So this is the effect of this discoursal deviation. The title, half an hour. Title meaning the title hints that something important happened earlier, but doesn't reveal what. So this also keep the audience in suspense that what this the poem half an hour after. So they might think, okay, there's something important. So here you keep your audience in suspension. So effect on the reader. As the reader goes through the poem, they are gradually led to understand the disaster, especially when they reach the clue in line 10, the spelled uranium. Now the reader Let me zoom it a little bit. Now, the reader's role as the eavesdropper. Now, indirect addressee. The reader hasn't directly addressed in the poem. Instead, they are listening to the conversation between the two scientists, making them feel like an induced drop. Other external choices use informal language, spoken language style. The poem imitate casual conversation using informal language rather than the formal style typical of poetry. Effect. The informal tone reflects the scientist's relaxed attitude even in a serious situation. Example of informal language, we can see that casual expressions and construction form are used. Phrases like what's just happened, this is contracted form, or contracted form showing that the casual and indifferent tone. So they take this lack of interest in something serious, or the topic is very much serious, but they do not take interest in them, and they are using informal tone. And we can see that also truncated sentences, short unfinished sentences reinforce their lack of concern. Use of Australian dialect spelling, words like berry and anything use Australian spelling, you can see, right? And in fact, this suggests that the scientists could represent Australian nuclear scientists, emphasizing their irresponsibility. Names with connotation hippo, this name invoked the image of a thick skinned, large, and slow moving animal, symbolizing carelessness. Additional element highlighting the scientist's indifference, Dr. Hippo's defect. Mispronunciation. Dr. Hippo has a speech defect that causes him to mispronounce certain words. Effect. This add to his unflattering portrayals, making him appear careless. Lack of rhythm and rhyme. Disorderly structure. The poem lacks the usual rhythm and rhyme found in traditional poetry. Effect. The chaotic structure reflect the disorder caused by the scientist's mistake. Sprung's remarks of emotional detachment. Key moment. Sprung's comment that it is funny he doesn't feel anything. Effect. This highlight the scientist's emotional detachment from the disaster consequences. So thank you so much. It was all about the formalist stylistic analysis of a poem, half an hour after. So see you next time. Thank you.